Dr. Pariser, thank you very much for making time for me today and coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
So first off, I have to ask, and judging by your background and as well as another interview I saw with you, you live on a boat?
I do, yeah.
What
In
is that
Marina
like?
del Rey. Oh, it's fantastic. Um, I always had in the back of my mind, whenever I needed to move from an apartment or sell a house I was living in, well, maybe I'll move on to a boat. But I always had, mostly like when there was a breakup, and I was alone, I thought, oh, well, I'll go live on a boat and I'll live this exotic life. But then I would always think, well, boats are small and narrow and damp, and the laundry is hanging and it's dark and you're cooking on a hot plate and you can't keep your balance and it smells like fish. And then a friend of mine invited me down for brunch on his boat. And it was a big, spacious thing and stable and dry and didn't smell like fish. And I thought to myself, you know what? It happened to be at a time when I really needed a place to live. So I thought, yeah, I could do this. So the next day I went out looking for a boat. And that was 6 years ago. And I've been living on it ever since.
Okay, it's going to take some serious restraint on my part to not just talk about that for the entire hour. That's really interesting.
Well, we could talk about it, and then we'll have a different interview about the book.
No. Well, I do, obviously, I do want to talk about your new book, but just boat. What's the biggest drawback living on a boat? I mean, 6 years. What's the biggest drawback?
It's the drawbacks are basically the same as the drawbacks of living on an RV. So that it's got to be self-contained. All systems, including the toilets and the kitchen and the lights and the heat and the air conditioning, everything's got to be self-contained. And so there's much more ongoing maintenance. You don't have a gardener. You don't have to mow the lawn. But you do have to keep the engines running, and you do have to keep all the boat systems operating. And unless you can afford some gigantic yacht, like 100 feet, 200, these mega yachts, there isn't quite enough space the way there is in a house where you just spread out, where you have a big kitchen or a lot of closets. So you don't have a lot of closet space. And even my boat's 56 feet. And so that's a pretty big boat. And it's pretty wide. And it's got enough space for me. But about 6 months ago, I started dating this woman, and she's basically living with me. Not basically, she's living with me. And so then we get into closet space, and we get into how many people can work in the kitchen and that kind of stuff. So, and even if you own the boat, you're still paying slip fees and maintenance fees. So that's the downside.
Okay, well, your timing of moving in with this new woman was pretty good, given the quarantine.
Oh
the
man, was
that
it
we're
ever?
living through. Yeah,
Although it could have been terrible, because
that's true too.
I mean, this is a lot of pressure to put on a new relationship.
Certainly.
And so it happened. I got lucky. She's somebody who's very easy to live with.
That's great. Well, one thing I've been asking all of my guests, and again, I make it a point to not really talk about what some people call topical items, things in the news and all the rest, but I've been making an exception because this is such an extraordinary time that we're all living through. I mean, my inclination is to ask, although it might be difficult to answer, what has this experience taught you, this strange quarantine, pandemic, apocalyptic period that we're all living to? What do you think firstly, what has this period just been like for you personally? And what have you learned through this strange period that we're all living through?
What it's been like is, in a funny sense, it goes along with where I was going anyway in life, which was, I had about a year ago, I stopped seeing patients to be able to sit down and write. And that's what I'm doing. And I discovered that I really quite like the calm, the peace, the artistic focus. And so it's not hurting me at all on a professional level. It actually feels quite kind of in sync with where I am emotionally right now. In terms of, friends and family, that's a different story. I don't get to see them the way I'd like. But I get to see my girlfriend a whole lot. She makes up for it.
Great.
So it's actually been pretty good. And as you might have read, there's a lot of people buying boats these days, along with RVs and bicycles, because, they can't send the kids to camp, and they can't go to Europe for the summer. And so they've got the money, at least some of them do. And so people are buying boats. And so it's a big, big boating extravaganza right now, like at least all over America.
I'd heard about guns. I hadn't heard about boats.
People are buying guns for different reasons, obviously. But although that I think has stopped. In the beginning, everybody was terrified of a breakdown in the social order. That hasn't happened. So there were lines outside gun stores, which isn't the case anymore. But yeah, they're buying boats because people want to get out of the house and do something that won't imperil them. And getting on a boat with the people that you love and already know are safe is a thing you can do.
Plus, you can just pull up the anchor and take off if things get really hairy, right?
Yeah, I don't need a gun.
Exactly.
I have a moat called the Pacific Ocean.
That's tremendous. Well, as long as we're talking about this topic and this theme, I was noticing on your blog that you talk about, or you were writing about, people managing fear and anxiety during this period of profound uncertainty. Do you have any just general thoughts on how people can better manage their emotions during this very strange period we're all living through?
Well, my first answer has nothing to do with the period that we're living through. It has to do with my feelings about emotions in general. So emotions are my specialty. I'm actually working with a partner creating a mobile app to help raise people's level of emotional intelligence. I believe that this is the thing that we can do that will help people more than anything else in the whole wide world. And so the basic rule of feelings is feel them. What happens is that people run away from their feelings. And when they do, bad things tend to happen because the underlying emotion doesn't disappear. It just gets expressed in a different kind of a way. So instead, if you're angry at your girlfriend, let's say, and you don't sit down and say, I'm angry at you, she keeps doing whatever she's doing that pissed you off, and you only get angrier, and then you explode. This is what Robert Glover talks about in his book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is the idea that he talks about something called a victim puke. And what that is you say yes when you want to say no, but you feel resentful, and then you do it again, and the resentment builds, and you do it again. And little by little, the resentment and the anger and the frustration ratchet up until, she says one more thing and you explode. And she looks at you and goes, what did I say? What was so terrible about this one thing? And the answer is nothing. It was as my then 3-year-old sister once said, the strawberry that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, that's well put. It's funny. I had a very similar moment just 2 nights ago where I have a family member who's having a bit of a health crisis. And obviously that's very concerning and scary. And I was kind of carrying around this energy all day. And then I had a date in the evening. And so we're walking on the beach. It's this gorgeous night. And I don't want to bring her down. I don't want to talk about my issue. And she says, well, what's wrong? Like, I know you, like something's up. And I immediately, my reaction was, no, I'm fine. I'm good. And there was even some resentment in me during that moment because I'm not letting that emotion, not that I have to do the victim puke. I completely know what you're talking about. But then she said, no, like, what's really wrong? And the moment I just said, well, actually, here's what's going on. Immediately there's this sense of, like this letting go of that resentment, and not resentment toward her, but resentment toward my own self-imposed censorship, if you know what I mean.
Yes, that's right. But I want to add something, that the self-imposed censorship, because if you're a nice guy, the self-imposed censorship is all about trying to make her feel okay, or make her feel good, or not make her feel bad, which then is a way of protecting yourself. And what it does, in a funny sense, and tell me if you agree with me on this, is it infantilizes the other person.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good word for it.
If she's a grown-up, and I'm sure she is, she certainly sounds like one, I like to give people the choice. I like to treat them like adults and say, okay, here's the situation. You're right, there's something bothering me. Here's the headline. Do you want to talk about it or not talk about it? I'm going to be okay either way. But let's talk about talking about it, and give her a choice to say yes or no, what she wants.
I'd like to ask you about this. I wasn't planning on this, but you mentioned that you stopped seeing patients recently so you could write and finish your book and all that. And so I do coaching, and I coach a lot of men one-on-one. And one thing I've noticed from recovering nice guys is sometimes they err in the opposite direction. The pendulum swings too far the other way, where it's nothing but voicing emotions and all this stuff all the time. And I think partly my moment the other night is because I'm very conscious of that, and I don't want to be one of those guys. So there's something about the man who takes care of his own business, who, endures certain experiences with silence and stoicism. There's something about that still appeals to me on some level, simply because I've been influenced by some of the people I've been coaching, for example, because I watch them go too far in the opposite direction. But I mean, you can comment on that if you want, but before we do, it's probably worth defining. I mean, so for anyone listening to this, because there's always people who are brand new to No More Mr. Nice Guy syndrome. What does nice guy syndrome mean to you?
Nice guy syndrome is it's basically an approach to life that centers around the idea that if you make other people happy, that if you're selfless and never put your needs first, put other people's needs first, that you're going to live a wonderful life and get everything that you ever wanted without asking for it, including and especially the love that you're looking for. And that's it in a kind of a nutshell. Yeah. There's a million things that nice guys do, a million ways that tends to express itself, but that's the basic nut of it.
And you've openly described yourself, and I've watched several interviews and in your book as well, you describe yourself as a recovering nice guy. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that means to you. What does it mean to be a recovering nice guy, and how did you get to that point?
Good question. And let me tie it in with what you were saying about the pendulum swinging in the other direction. To recover from a way of being a kind of a large scale way of being, whether it's a nice guy or a recluse or a hoarder or whatever it happens to be, is first off to get to the underlying feelings that are driving the behavior. And most often it's fear. Behind the fear, there's a depressive core that it's almost like has an incredibly powerful gravitational field. It's a dark hole like a black hole that pulls everything into it. And so the fear on a really fundamental level is about falling into the black hole and never coming out again. So recovering is a process whereby you let go of all of the ways that you've developed over the years, or many of the ways, to keep yourself away from what you fear, particularly the black hole, and recognize that as a grown-up, you can handle this stuff that you couldn't when you were a kid, which is when it all got developed. So as you give up some of these things, well, strange things happen. Sometimes the pendulum swings. Sometimes it doesn't budge enough. It's like, you play a sport?
Yeah, I swim and I've played hockey and baseball.
Okay. So imagine a baseball swing. It's hard to hit a baseball, particularly
Yes,
at a high level. So let's say you've been swinging in a particular way in college, and now you go up to AA ball, and you have a hitting coach, and he wants to change something. He notices you're batting about 240, but that's not going to take you up to AAA or the pros, right?
Unless I'm a power hitter, yes.
Unless you're a consistent power hitter.
Yeah.
When you connect, you really connect. So he works on you, and the first thing you got to do is stop doing what you've been doing. Because you can't do the old and the new at the same time. There's a therapist who wrote an article called "Staying the Same While Changing," which is what everybody wants to do. I'll just add this. It doesn't work. So you got to undo it. And when you undo it, all kinds of shit breaks loose. And for a while, you are going to be a mess until you learn the new swing. And that's the same thing with knowing how to hit a baseball, knowing how to hit a tennis ball, knowing how to relate to another human being. On a certain level, they're very similar. It's about knowing how. And once you stop doing what you already know how to do and try to do other things, there's a learning curve. And in a learning curve, you're going to get it wrong a lot. You'll undercompensate, you'll overcompensate, you'll do all kinds of things.
What got you to the point where you realized, holy shit, I'm a nice guy and something needs to change here?
Tell you, I was going through my life, which worked sometimes, it didn't work. I knew I had problems, and I was in therapy, and I was trying my best to work on the problems. And I was doing a pretty good job, and things were getting better, but they weren't getting better enough.
What kind of problems?
I was depressed. I was working on that, and that was getting better, but it was still around. I had interpersonal problems. I was kind of competitive with people. I was a nice guy. I had nice guy stuff, so I was trying to be selfless, but also acting like a victim. I would give everybody else decision-making power, then find tricky ways to take it back. I mean, there were a lot of things that relationships didn't last. I was never satisfied. I thought I was settling. Um, I had a lot of issues in relationships, dominating or controlling, but then feeling dominated or controlled. So I think there were a whole lot of things going on. In point of fact, I think if you watch the interview I did with Robert Glover, I talked about this, the idea that there were so many problems. They seemed like a million problems, and I couldn't figure out how to deal with them all. They just seemed like each one seemed different, and it was like being in a swarm of bees and getting stung from all directions. And what happened was I read Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, and suddenly things made sense in a different way. It's like suddenly I could see where all the bees were coming from. I was still getting stung by all the bees, but now I could see that they belonged to a hive, with a queen, my mother. And so it seemed like there was one big problem rather than a million little problems. And that helped me to shift the focus of my work to the central conviction that I had and start to shift that.
And so when you're talking about being in therapy and dealing with a number of these problems, were you a psychotherapist at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of curious what that's like. I mean, does that complicate things to some extent when you are ostensibly helping other people sort out their problems and you're dealing with this inner strife and struggle yourself?
I would say yes, except for the fact that every psychotherapist deals with problems, whether they're nice guy problems or whatever problems. Psychotherapists have no fewer problems than anybody else. They may have worked harder on them, but they still got them. If you're going to coach people, I teach classes on psychotherapy and emotions and stuff, and I'll say to the class, what's the difference between a patient and a non-patient? And everybody thinks about it, and they scratch their head, and they make a bunch of guesses. And the commonest guess is, well, the patient has emotional problems. And the answer is, no, not at all. Everybody has emotional problems, including the therapist. The difference is the patient's willing and able to pay for your services. That's the only difference. It's like the guys you coach. They're the ones who are willing to pay for your services. Everybody else has the same problems or their own set of problems. So psychotherapists have problems. And sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes we feel like hypocrites or imposters because I've got to, particularly when the patient brings up an issue you haven't resolved yet. And you think, fuck, man, I have no right to be treating this person. In fact, he's farther down the road than I am. So I don't I better keep my damn mouth shut at this point in time. But mostly that doesn't happen. And in fact, I want to add one little point and then I'll get back to you. Sigmund Freud said, and I found this to be true, he did his best work when he was slightly depressed.
Interesting. I mean, that could lead to a whole discussion. I mean, I'm obsessed with music and how much great music, great art has emerged from depression. This is a different point than you're making, but yeah, it's an interesting question. Coming back to psychotherapists and therapy, I always think of my favorite shows, The Sopranos, and Dr. Melfi, Tony's therapist, is in therapy herself, and that was a great storyline. So yes, absolutely. Coming back to nice guy syndrome and No More Mr. Nice Guy, did you always have an interest in working with men in particular, men's development work? I mean, did you have any exposure to that world, either in your personal life or in your private practice before you found Dr. Glover's work?
I didn't have it in private practice, although when you're a male these days, in the old days, way back in the day, almost all therapists were male, particularly psychoanalysts. Although from the beginning, Freud said, women were equal. And so there were women psychoanalysts right from the very beginning. But still, there were more. The requirement in America that to be a psychoanalyst, you had to be an MD, basically said there's going to be a lot more men than women. These days, that requirement's changed, and the entire field is now primarily female. So that when you're a male and you're an older male, like I saw my first patient in the year 2000. I was 49 years old. So I'm already an older male. So, guys come and this is what they want, an older male who can model, kind of strength and decisiveness and assertiveness while also being open emotionally, or at least kind of in that direction, a balance. So I did get a lot of male patients, but it wasn't a specialty of mine. However, in my personal life, I was always interested in it. I spent almost 20 years in a men's emotional support group that I started back in like 1981. And I did what's called the Warrior Weekend, the Mankind Project Warrior Weekend. And I read a lot of men's literature. And so it was something that was of interest to me. And yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to say it's a nice segue into talking about the book specifically. So No More Mr. Nice Guy, The Hero's Journey. What inspired you to write this book? Where did this come from?
Once I started working with nice guys who had read Dr. Glover's book, we realized that we all had a similar experience. And that was, we had read Dr. Glover's book and just kind of felt absolutely described to a T in the book. We just really found ourselves there. And we all had the same question. Well, okay, I admit it, this is me. Now what? And if you've read Dr. Glover's book, he's got something he calls breaking free activities. He doesn't have quite that many, and they're kind of sketchy. And the real message of the book is get a therapist. I once said to him, and I said, your book's not a self-help book because nobody can use it to really help themselves. It's like, go get a therapist and let him help you. All right, but not very many therapists are trained, have read this book or have trained in this way of working. And at least before the pandemic, not everybody had a geographically available therapist. Now that everybody's doing telehealth, you can get somebody from anywhere in the world, but up to that point you couldn't. So I said to Robert Glover, and I have become friends. So he lives down in Puerto Vallarta. His mother's up in Seattle. He goes through Los Angeles, and when he does, he stays on the boat. And we have dinner and wine and chat and like conversations about stuff. And we've done some workshops together here in Los Angeles. And so one day I said to him, Robert, like everybody wants something, like how do I get from here to there, the roadmap? And so like you need to write the workbook to No More Mr. Nice Guy. And he said, I don't want to. So I said, well, I'll write it with you. And he said, I don't want to. You write it. So that's how that's how it came about. I said, okay, I'll write it. Now he was involved to the extent that he read some early drafts and he wrote the foreword. And it was Robert who kind of latched on to the idea of the hero's journey. And originally, to me, it was the workbook to No More Mr. Nice Guy. But he pushed me to bring that out, and so I did. And it's part of what made my book more of a standalone book than just a companion book.
Yeah, and I think I've heard you tell that story before, and I think you tell me what you think of this, but I think it speaks to Dr. Glover's integrity in a lot of ways, to sort of give you his blessing and to encourage you, and to you even use the title in the title of the book, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
He has tremendous integrity. He is a really good man and a really generous guy, and my life is significantly richer for having encountered his mind both in print and in person.
I'm speaking to him later tonight, so I'll tell him you said so.
Oh, don't tell him that.
No, of course not.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Tell him I said that.
So let's get into the hero's journey. So I'm sure many people will be familiar with that term, and maybe Joseph Campbell and Star Wars and all the rest. But for people who aren't familiar with it, what does the hero's journey mean to you?
It means, what does the hero's journey mean to me? It's about the experience of psychological growth and change. It's whenever you set out to change something major in your life, particularly psychologically, it means leaving what's come to be known as the comfort zone, your day-to-day life, and moving out into an unknown realm. And now we're talking in kind of mythological or archetypal terms. And Campbell was influenced by Jung as well as Freud. And so we are talking about kind of visual metaphors and archetypal imagery and mythological narratives, which kind of elevate the story. And even though my story is not mythological, it's fun and exciting and stimulating to think of it in that way, to see yourself in a heroic position. As long as you kind of keep that in check a little bit, you understand that when you go to work, you can't like tell the boss, like everybody, what a hero you are. It's an internal process. But I also spent like 25 years working in the movie business. And so the hero's journey is part of almost every story. You mentioned Star Wars. It happens to be a particularly clear example, but it's buried in almost every story. Every good film or almost, not everyone, but almost everyone is about some sort of psychological change. And somebody starting out with a limitation or a problem that then gets resolved by the end.
And you
yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, in the book, you kind of establish, and you tell me if I'm interpreting this wrong, but it seems to me that the end goal, if we can call it that, is to become a more integrated man, as you call it.
Yes.
I'm intrigued by this term, and I'd appreciate if you could unpack this a little bit more. I mean, what does being an integrated man mean to you? Like, what does that look like for you? And you can even speak just practically, if you like.
Sure. Well, the term integration, which I borrowed from Robert Glover, to me has to do with the integration of all aspects of yourself. So one of the important things is to integrate those things that we have been pushing away, for fear that they'll lead to rejection and things we're ashamed of, things we think make us look bad. So there's an integration of all aspects of your humanity, whether it's your maleness, your feelings, your impulses, your desires, your sexuality, all of it. To be able to integrate it into who you are so that you can then go and live life forward, not backward. Live life from a place of, here's what I feel, here's what I like, here's what I want. And use that to go forward into the world and get the life, get the things that you're looking for that will make you happy.
If you had to boil it down, who is this book for? Who do you think listening to this could really benefit from your work?
Other than nice guys?
Yeah. Is there a more specific sort of ideal reader you had in mind?
I don't think. In point of fact, I would go the other way. As I was writing this, I kept thinking, how can I write this for everybody? And because I set out to write a companion book to No More Mr. Nice Guy, I stuck with that. Maybe selfishly, I thought that it would have a built-in market, or because I know this specifics better, and because if I made it for everybody, it would be this big, and maybe because I thought it would take years and years to write it. So I just stuck with nice guys. But I would love to write a book for people in general.
No More Mrs. Nice Girl.
Yeah. No, yeah, Goodbye Goody Two Shoes was the title I came up with.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
But it's, yeah, but, and I would want to write that with a woman.
Mm.
And I'd have to see who's out there. I think if I get established as someone who wrote a book, maybe there's somebody out there who might be who's written something as well that would be a good candidate to co-write with.
Mm. Let's talk about women. One of my favorite topics. You mentioned earlier that you got
I
a new
love
relationship.
them.
Yeah, of course, me too. You mentioned earlier that you got a new relationship earlier this year, and I guess I'm really interested in knowing more about your own kind of hero's journey. And so, and you can take this question however you want, but I'm curious how you are showing up in dating and relationships differently today compared to maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. The first thing is I show up wearing my feelings and my desires on my sleeve, rather than going in trying to make them happy. I'm going in trying to make me happy, which turns out to make them happy, much happier as well, because I'm honest, and I'm much more authentic. And so I'll say, I want this. And I encourage something back, like I don't want that, or I want something different. And so that we can now have a relationship based on a mutual desire, a mutual understanding, mutual authenticity. So that's a big one. A second thing is that since I'm owning what I want, what I like, and what I don't like, I also try to own my badness. So I'm no longer, one of the things that's important to nice guys is that they're always trying to look good. So I no longer am trying to look good. I'm trying to look real. but I'm not trying to look good. And behind that, I assume that if I'm real, that triggers something that my partner doesn't like, we can talk about it. And there's something going to be okay about my whatever it is that's real. It's coming from a place. I'm not an evil man. I have selfish moments. I have spiteful, but I'm not an evil man. And so if I say or do something that hurts her, I want to know about it. I want to talk about it. I want to be curious about it and get to the bottom of it, and sort out whose part is what part. And that then takes me to another thing, which is since I'm now owning my badness, I'm clearer and more confident about saying to somebody, I think that's your part, or, I don't like that you're doing that, or I don't think that's really me in this particular, or this particular part of it is me. I think you're making a contribution to this as well that needs to be acknowledged. And I can be confident in that because I'm talking about my contribution. I'm not trying to hide it.
So I did some quick math. You tell me if I'm wrong, but are you 69 now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about the differences between dating at 69 compared to me. I'm in my early 30s. I mean, what are the main differences there?
The age gap between me and my girlfriend is much bigger than between you and your girlfriend.
Simple as that.
Yeah. It's that, and I'm more okay being me. I'm more tolerant. I'm more patient. I'm less threatened. I'm more, and this is not just about age, but because there's plenty of old fuckers who are assholes, right? So it's also got to do with the work that I did. I try my best to give from a place of generosity rather than to get something. And I feel more, this is Erickson's term, I feel more generative. I like giving. I like helping. I have a lot. I don't mean in terms of money and possessions, but I have what I need. And that's which comes from self-acceptance. So if 20 or 30 years ago, if I had a spiteful thought, a malicious thought, a thought I wanted to fuck somebody else, or like whatever thoughts I had or feelings that I felt guilty and ashamed about, I had to hide them. I had to do things. Now I can just say, what's on my mind. I don't have to get something to make up for that. I can just simply be okay with whatever that is. So I don't need anything because I don't think there's anything wrong with what I am feeling or thinking. So I can be more generous because I'm not scurrying around trying to get. I give. And that makes the relationship much better.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's really well put. So for anyone who's just listening to this, I've been noticing, and again, I watched, I watched a few of your interviews. You wear a necklace and it looks like a dog tag, but it's a puzzle piece. And I've noticed you've been wearing that in all of your interviews. What's the story behind that?
It says on it, it's a puzzle piece, and my girlfriend wears the same thing. And she got them when we were it's kind of like a letter sweater. It's like, she got it when we first started dating, and it says, "You are my person," and the puzzle pieces fit together. So
that's pretty cute. Pretty cute, Dr. Paris.
Yes, it's fucking cute. I'm old. You know what? I'm old enough to be cute.
Very good. What are you most excited about these days? What is motivating you when you wake up in the morning? What are you jazzed up about?
Uh, a lot of things. First off, I wake up next to this beautiful woman, and I put my arms around her, and I feel her warmth, and I look at her, and I kiss her, and tell her I love her, and she tells me she loves me, and I feel so lucky to be alive. You know, I'm lucky to have this woman in my life. It's fantastic. And then I get up and I'm on this boat, and the water is, well, it's the marina. The water is not blue, but it's water. And there's boats and seagulls and sea lions, and it's just gorgeous out there. And I'm excited about finishing up. You would think the book is finished, but it's really not. The ebook's out on Kindle, but they keep screwing up the cover of the paperback, and a lot of people want the paperback because it's at least something of a workbook. So I'm trying desperately to get them to color correct the cover, at which point it'll be available on Kindle. Meanwhile, I got another company trying to get an ebook available on the other venues like Barnes & Noble and Apple. And I'm also doing a paperback through Barnes & Noble. So there's a lot of that going on that pushes me. And then there's the app about emotional intelligence. I've done a lot of writing, content. There's some content that still needs to be done. And then we're going to start moving into design and creation. So that's happening as well. And I think finally I'm trying, because I'm 69, I'm actually trying to learn how to hit a golf ball.
Oh, wow.
Well, because, I've read that, golf is the last stage before death. So I figured it's my time now.
Yeah.
So Medicare, Social Security, golf, death. That's kind of the life cycle.
It's actually the law. Yeah, they passed the law. You have to start golfing once you turn 60. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And if you can find your way around it, you're immortal.
Yeah.
You know that, right?
I've
because if you don't play golf, you'll never die.
Right.
So I'm learning how to hit a golf ball. And it's not to play golf. I don't even go out on the golf course. I just go to driving range and hit golf balls at this point in time. And it's more of like, I don't know about you. I did martial arts for about 20 years. And it's kind of like trying to, do a basic martial arts move. Like, here's a quick story. When I was training, not my sensei, who was like some 7th degree or 8th, the master of masters who they once asked them the first thing you learn in karate is a front punch, how to do a front punch. So they once asked him, what's the hardest thing in karate? And he said, the front punch. So it's about like really kind of getting the zen of this kind of basic move down, which like really in some way that I can't fully understand, satisfies me, challenges me, and satisfies me. So I like that.
Very cool. Very cool. So, Doctor, what's the #1 way people can connect with you online?
Go to my website, which is www.drpariser.com, spelled DRPARISER. It's actually drparisertherapy.com. And that's the best way. They can also email me at michael@drpariser.com. Both of those ways will work.
I really enjoyed this conversation today, Doctor, and thank you for joining me.
And thank you so much. You look like you're in a wonderful place. You're in Thailand?
I'm in Bali, Indonesia, which is a very wonderful place.
Oh man, that just looks great. And where the water really is blue.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, your life is not looking too bad from here either, I'm telling you.
You know what? I've always wanted to go to the South Pacific, and it's like one of the 2 or 3 places at the top of my travel list if the pandemic ever lifts. I'm going to the South Sea. I want to go to Japan and the South Sea Islands and Scandinavia. Those are my top 3.
Well, if you
And
ever
so,
make it to Bali, needless to say, let me know.
if you ever make it to California, come on the boat. We'll go take a drive.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Doctor.
You're welcome, Zachary. A pleasure talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Humans in Love. If you'd like to learn more about my guests, my work, or you'd like to listen to back episodes of the podcast, please visit humansinlove.com. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Humans in Love using your podcast app of choice. If you're a fan of Humans in Love, and you'd like to help keep the show going and help me spread the word, please take 30 seconds out of your day to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Before I let you go, remember that life is short, so let's make it count. And thank you, as always, for your listenership and support. I'll talk to you again very soon.